All right, shall we start? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your coming. Welcome to Wednesday Forum. This is a weekly discussion that is held by both the Center for Religious and Cross-Cultural Studies and the Indonesian Consortium for Religious Studies, ICRS, which is a consortium of 3 universities, and that is Gadjah Mada University, Islamic State University of Sunan Kalijaga, and Duta Wacana Christian University, in which our speaker today is now a visiting professor. And CRCS is a master program in religious studies here at the Graduate School of Gadjah Mada University, or UGM. I'm Aziz, a staff member of CRCS, and I'm now at the graduate school, Sekolah Pasca Sarjana at UGM. And we have had already our speaker today named Korgrit, who is a visiting professor at the Faculty of Theology at Duta Wacana Christian University. He has been there for 1 year now, and he obtained his PhD in interreligious relations in Pakistan at Utrecht University in 2019. And he is going to talk about, well, the title is The Danger of Things. I'm not sure what that means, but the subtitle says it's about the material religion in Indonesia. Usually when we talk about religion, much of the emphasis has been around the idea of the sacred or the divine, things that are immaterial. But this idea has been, criticized by some recent scholars such as Wilfred Cantwell Smith, Talal Asad, etc. I guess many of the CRCS students who has been, studying religion in academic way would be familiar with these people, and I think Korgrit would propose, an alternative approach of studying religion in its material aspect. Well, I'm not sure yet, but let's listen to his talk later. But before we proceed, the speaker have 45 minutes maximum for the talk, and then later we will follow it with discussion, Q&A, and comments for those of you who want to ask or want to comment. You may write down your questions and comments in the chat box, or if you prefer to speak directly, I will allow you to turn on your video and then you can speak. Or for those of you who are watching via YouTube, you may also write down your comments in the comment section of our CRCS YouTube channel. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Korgrit. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Aziz. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm very happy that I get to share a little bit of my research and a little bit of my basically my search for a suitable approach to the study of religion, also in the context of Indonesia. I will share my PowerPoint presentation in a little bit. And I'm hoping to clarify further within that presentation how I view the material approach to religion. So oftentimes it's abbreviated simply as material religion, or the material framework for the study of religion. So I will try to further explain my understanding of that approach in a little bit. And then actually more importantly, I'm hoping to make a connection with the study of religion in Indonesia. So I think one of the questions I want to answer in that part is, how can the material approach to religion be useful for the study of religion in Indonesia? And also, how can we as scholars and students of religion yeah, add new new understandings, new ways of looking at religion through our engagement with this particular approach in the context of Indonesia. So basically, to what extent does the religious landscape of Indonesia also add new perspectives on materiality of religion? So that's just a short note before we start, but I'll start sharing my screen now. And then, yeah. So this should be, I hope everyone can see this. If there's any technical issues, just let me know. Then I'm sure we can solve that. But yeah, I used to title The Danger of Things, and that is mostly because material religion, to some extent, of course, it has a potential to change our understanding of what religion is. It has a very, you could say, a very critical potential. Aziz already mentioned some scholars who have criticized definitions of religion based on their lack of materiality. So in that sense, it is almost a dangerous approach to religion, as in that it kind of threatens maybe a status quo or a certain understanding that has been quite dominant for a long time. But materiality is also, by some religions, such as the tradition that I myself find my background in, Protestant Christianity, materiality has also been oftentimes quite a difficult topic. There's been sensitivities around that. There's been, yeah, you know, there's been basically a force of dematerialization of religion through Protestantism. So that also kind of shows the danger of materiality, the danger of things. So that's why I use this title, and also because it sounds slightly less boring than just material religion. Yeah, before I start, I want to make a brief note on positionality as a part of methodology. So I myself am, of course, an outsider to Indonesia. I do live in Indonesia, but I'm from the Netherlands. And as I'm sure everyone is aware, there's a huge colonial history between the Netherlands and Indonesia. And the reason I mention that is because colonialism will also come up several times during this presentation. So I think it's just good to mention that. Also, I think it's good to mention, yeah, that my position in Indonesia right now, I consider myself somewhat of a, you could say, a colonial relic or heritage, so to speak. So the only reason, or the main reason why I'm probably working and living here is because there is this history. And I think it's just important to mention that, and also to mention that, yeah, I personally think the Netherlands should strive more to improve the ties with Indonesia after everything that happened. So that's just a quick note on positionality. Then a little bit of the background of this paper. So I work at UKDW, at which I'm involved in a research project to ecology, religion and ecology. And of course, about a year ago, we were hoping to do several studies and field work as well to religion and ecology in Indonesia, but those plans were disrupted by COVID. And as a result, I thought I should just maybe focus on how can we actually approach this topic of ecology, religion and ecology in Indonesia. And that's how I ended up with this particular approach to the study of religion, material religion. So this presentation is basically based on a paper that I'm writing now on material religion in Indonesia. And that paper is far from finished. And so I'm quite happy I can actually present some of it here, because I'm hoping that through input and questions and yeah, my writing on this paper will also further develop and be improved. So yeah, that's a bit on the background. Now, let's see. I wanted to give a very clear example of what the dematerialization of religion means in religious studies, or the dematerialization of religious studies, what it means and how we actually experience that. And I found on the website of ICRS, I found that, I think this may have been a Wednesday forum as well, where it was a presentation of a study, and it was a study to the concept of interreligious studies in 53 doctoral dissertations at ICRS. And the results, if I'm not mistaken, so there were 52 dissertations, of which there was a thematic focus of 36% had a focus on identity, and 19% on exegesis, 15% on gender, and then there were some theoretical perspectives. Hermeneutics was quite a big theoretical perspective, and critical discourse analysis, and then theories of social identity and phenomenology were also quite often used by doctoral students at ICRS. And I think this in itself shows already that oftentimes we conceptualize religion in terms of identity. I think is quite a popular concept to use these days in relation to religion. But also a discourse. Discourse is a very important focus within religious studies at the moment, of course. I see the same thing with bachelor master students, for example, with the thesis of bachelor master students at UKDW. A lot of the topics that are discussed in those theses are things like spirituality, mysticism, also exegesis, but also, of course, discourse, meaning, public theology, ethics. So those are some of the main topics that students focus on. And I think this shows that religion is often conceptualized as something that is inward, that is part of internal processes within human beings, or it's conceptualized as something that is captured within text, as a term like exegesis shows. I myself actually had experienced the same thing when I was doing my PhD, and it was on religious identity, Christian identity in Pakistan. And I experienced the struggles with this concept of identity. How do you understand that in relation to religion? And so I think we've all maybe to some extent maybe noticed or experienced some of that inward focus within religious studies. I actually found an interesting quote from a famous Indonesian anthropologist, Kunjung Arangino, who he wrote a bibliography of I think the history of anthropology. So basically, various anthropological studies within Indonesia. And he said in this video, it is of course always easier for an observer of a strange culture. Here he's talking about observers from abroad, mostly during colonial times. So for an observer from a strange culture to pay most attention to the outward physical aspect of a culture. So it is also, this kind of shows that it's also considered easier to focus on materialism, as if concepts like belief and like mysticism, spirituality are more complex, have more abstraction to it than outward physical aspects. So this is to give a little bit of an idea where I'm coming from with this particular focus on material religion. So this dematerialization, of course, an important question is, how did this actually happen? How did we end up with a dematerialized understanding of religion or focus within religious studies? Quickly, I'll make a quick note on the outline of the presentation. So first, I want to look at dematerialization as kind of a background of where material religion is coming from. Then next I want to go to the material turn, what that actually means. I will give a little bit of some definitions that are available of material religion or materiality and some of the approaches within that tradition. And then next I want to go to material religion in Indonesia. And I want to kind of discuss two things: how old materials or old previous studies can be looked at through a new material lens, and what the potential is of material religion in the current context for religious studies in Indonesia. And then of course I'll end with some conclusions. So first of all, what is material religion? The dematerialization of religion is often linked to European Protestantism. Of course, there are traces of dematerialization within Christianity that are way before Protestantism. There's always been somewhat of a tense relationship between, for example, the body and Christian faith. If you read texts from St. Augustine, for example, those already show. And of course, this is to a large extent influenced by Western philosophy. So, but here you see a quick example of one of the great. This is a painting, a depiction of the Church of Our Lady in Antwerp during the Great Iconoclasm. So, when a lot of the religious materiality of Catholics was destroyed by European Protestants in an attempt to purify this religion, because these material forms were rejected by Protestantism. Of course, I don't want to claim that this historical event was caused by theological reasons only, or causes only. I think there was much more going on than that, but it does kind of illustrate the dematerialization of Christianity in that period. Then, of course, there's a dualism in Western philosophy. So the distinction between body and mind. Just to give you two examples of that, the philosophy of Descartes, for example, who kind of constructs a hierarchy between body and mind, in which mind is closer to reality, to being, than body is. Immanuel Kant, of course, with his transcendental idealism, which also takes mind over matter, basically. He departs from mind, and our perception of materiality is basically mediated by our mind, or to a large extent depends on the way we see things. So this already shows this kind of strict distinction between material and mind, and has contributed to the dematerialization of religion. Then, of course, theology, basically theology and religious studies in Europe was often taken to be, especially in the 19th century, became subjects that only dealt with the immaterial, whereas the natural sciences dealt with the material. So empiricism was to a large extent something of the natural sciences and not of theology and religious studies. Then another contributing factor were European colonialism and the missions, Christian missions. Through these processes, through these events, Christianity, or basically colonial agents and missionaries, tried to differentiate Christianity from what they considered paganism or superstition or primitivism. So in contact with other cultures, they distinguished Christianity from other religious forms, and to an extent tried to basically equated the abstraction of religion, which they equated that with Christianity, with the more material forms of religion, which they thought of as either lesser forms of religion or not religion at all, or false religion. Even those are some of the terms that they used to indicate non-Christian religiosity in that time. And of course, European modernism, European modernity and secularism, to a large extent, caused the privatization of religion. So this again shows there was a differentiation of different domains within society. Religion was taken to be a domain that was confined to the private, to the immaterial, not the public, not something that not something tangible or something that you find outside people's personal lives. And then early anthropology, of course, to a large extent focused on strange belief, what anthropologists considered strange belief, which again contributed to an understanding of religion as belief. Other aspects of religion, ritualism, materiality, were often not given same place. So in short, a lot of these factors contributed to a movement in which religion was equal to belief, to subjectivity, to signification, meaning, and was this inward-centered, was immaterial. And this understanding of religion is often to this, of course, it's criticized now, but often to this day still leaves leaves traces within the religious studies, basically. I should move on because I don't want to dwell too long on this. Yeah. So then there's what people call the material turn. Of course, I've seen papers on how many turns have we had by now. There's of course this terminology of a turn is quite often used, and it's also used with regards to materialism as a new approach. Anyway, there's I think several, basically several, you could say traditions of research or approaches within humanities, social science and philosophy that kind of hint at this new interest in materialism. And so in philosophy, we see this, for example, with the works of Bruno Latour, the actor network theory, which I can't discuss in detail, of course. But yeah, the actor network theory basically takes human and non-human actors as equal within a network. So this means that humans are not necessarily central to the analysis of interaction. So humans are not necessarily the central subject of study, but it also means that the whole, you could say the whole distinction between subject and object can be criticized from this perspective. So the distinction between, basically, oftentimes, let me put it this way. Oftentimes within studies, there's a need to look for causality or correlation in which subjects are taken to be central to movement and dynamics of causality. Within this actor network theory, it is much more about mutuality. So it's much more about how different entities within the network mutually influence each other. And these can be human entities, but also non-human entities. So that kind of criticizes this subject-object dichotomy. And that's similar for the concept of assemblage by Deleuze and Guattari. And these are also assemblages are also considered hybrid and dynamic formations, in which again this subject-object divide is criticized or is reassessed in a way. So again, entities within assemblages or within networks mutually affect each other, so they modify one another. Let's see if there's anything else I should mention on that. Yeah, here's a quick quote from Hazar, who says, "Material things possess a remarkable range of capacity that exceed the purview of human sense or knowing, and therefore insist that the materiality of material things themselves must be carefully considered, not merely interpreted for the implications on human concern." So the topic of study is not how people experience or perceive or how subjectivities deal with materiality, but material itself also becomes the topic of study, which is different from how possibly material was approached earlier on. Now, in social sciences and humanities, this is often referred to as a material turn. So in philosophy, it's often called new materialism, but in social science and humanities, material turn. And this can be seen as a reaction against a discursive turn or linguistic turn. I've mentioned that before, a focus on discourse, critical discourse analysis, for example, as a method or methodology can be criticized, but also can be complemented with a material approach to religion, or in a broader sense, a material approach within the humanities. In addition, the material return is often considered a middle road between realism and constructionism. So where knowledge within realism, knowledge is oftentimes considered to a large extent depend on the physical objects, and constructionism knowledge is oftentimes considered to be something that largely depends on subjectivity, so on our imagination, on the ways we construct the world around us. The material turn tries to basically combine both of these positions and to give a proper place to subjectivities, to imagination, to human imagination, human perception, as well as to physical objects and materiality. So in that sense, it can be considered somewhat in between there, between those two positions, you could say. Let's see, moving on. This, I think, is the last slide on material religion in itself. And after this, I'll move to what it could mean for the study of religion in Indonesia. So to show a little bit of the range, I'm trying to show a little bit of the range of definitions of material religion. Here you can see one definition that is very elaborate, with 5 points, and the other definition simply takes material religion to focus on things. And I think there's a lot of different definitions between those two. But I think what is most important here, so basically the first definition shows that it is about material religion is an investigation in the interaction between human bodies and physical objects, both natural and man-made, and human man-made. And then things basically it's a definition given by Birgit Meyer from Utrecht University, where I did my PhD, and it is basically an attempt to keep the definition of a material religion as indeterminate as possible. So basically as comprehensive and as open as possible, to make sure that anything can be considered material religion. So there is a lot of discussion within studies on material religion about what material religion actually is, what is religious materiality, and the definition of things tries to keep that as open as possible. just a quick note, there's several typologies on material religion as well. So oftentimes within material religion as basically a field of study, you could say. Materiality is approached differently by different people. It can be approached as symbolic representation. It can be approached as material as something that has efficiency, that has power. So just to name a few. And a last note on the definitions and approaches within material religion. Oftentimes, material religion is considered an interdisciplinary approach to the study of religion. So it includes approaches from archaeology, anthropology, of course, sociology, religious studies, theology can be included as well. So it is in itself oftentimes a interdisciplinary endeavor. I still have about 15 minutes, so I want to move on to material religion in Indonesia. So basically, material religion in Indonesia, I want to make two quick observations. The first is, to what extent can we look at old material, by which I mean previous studies, historical writings, through a material lens, so from a perspective of material religion. So if you look at old material in Indonesia, of course, there's often comprehensive descriptions of material findings in historical text in previous studies. A lot of these are written by colonial agents, oftentimes also by missionaries. So a lot of these texts are written by foreigners, by outsiders, who, of course, I should say, to a large extent, wrote and departed from a perspective of European Protestantism. So in a way, they contributed to the dematerialization of religion, but on the other hand, they do often offer rich descriptions of material conditions in Indonesia, in various localities within Indonesia. And I think it could be interesting to look at some of this material through some of these writings through a material lens, so to kind of reassess these historical writings through a material lens. And I wonder to what extent that could shed a new light on our new understanding, could provide a new understanding of many of these writings as well. Then apart from that, I've mentioned before in the introduction of this presentation, the bibliography by Kunjang Aringat, Anthropology in Indonesia. He mentions, of course, many detailed studies of various localities throughout Indonesia. I just mentioned a couple names here as examples of those. Oftentimes these are considered ethnographies, I guess. Just one quick example is the study by Clifford Geertz, of course, who I'm sure everyone will know, The Religion of Java, in which, by the way, in which I would say you cannot really find a material approach to religion. A lot of the religious materiality, which is discussed in the book, is of course secondary to the meanings, to the beliefs, to the signification, and that does not agree with the material approach to religion. Nevertheless, I think it is interesting to maybe reread some of those texts with a more with a stronger awareness of religious materiality as well. Yeah, just an example, for example, Clifford Geertz, but also someone like Andrew Beatty, who I mentioned in the last point, a more recent study, I think from 1999. They both give a very detailed description of the Selamatan, but they both do it in such a way that the material is to a large extent secondary to the meaning, to the signification. And I think it could be interesting to kind of reassess some of those ways of dealing with materiality. Yeah, I should move on from this because I don't want to. Yeah, so all this to say, there is of course a lot of material already, a lot of writings already, which in my opinion can be reinterpreted through a material lens. Then another thing I think, yeah, so basically in this part of my presentation, which is nearing the end, I want to kind of look at how material religion relates to some of the research interests that I have encountered in my time in Indonesia, in discussions with colleagues at UKDW, but also in many writings by many writings on religion in Indonesia. So to kind of explain what the potential could be of material religion, or to kind of start a discussion on what the potential could be of material religion in Indonesia. So first of all, I mentioned before, my focus on material religion kind of emerged from a research project on ecology and sustainability. And I think material religion has a potential for this particular topic of research within Indonesia because because material religion is open to new understandings of human and basically of non-human nature as religious materiality. So what that means, I think material religion to a large extent is open to taking natural objects as religious materials, whereas I think in a lot of other fields they are not necessarily looked at as religious objects, but more as natural objects or as maybe cultural materiality. But from a perspective of material religion, you can understand non-human nature also as religious materials or religious objects. And just to give an example of that, Robert Wessing wrote several papers, of course, especially on religion in Java. But some of these papers he also wrote on natural objects such as animals, forests, hills, and how these objects function in the religious lives of people throughout Indonesia, for example. Another example would be Michael Dove, who wrote more on agroecological religious forms. So how agriculture functions and how agricultural materials also function within religion. So how they can be taken as religious objects themselves. Then another field in which I think material religion has potential is our understanding of agency and power, and is to extend our understanding of agency and power beyond human actors, basically. So cultural material objects within material religion, cultural material objects can also be considered as something with agency and efficiency. So I can give an example of the Netherlands. There's been a lot of research in the Netherlands to religious materiality in the form of buildings, architecture. So basically the repurposing of churches, for example. A lot of churches are empty, the building is sold, and then it's used as a museum or a yoga studio or other things, or sometimes it's completely demolished. And oftentimes this repurposing of buildings causes a lot of sensibility, so it causes a lot of emotions for people. And this shows that the efficiency or the agency that material objects can have, so they can cause conflict or debate within communities. I think this could also be interesting in the context of Indonesia, especially considering the discussions that have taken place in the past on places of worship and where they can be built, where they cannot be built, and some of the debates around that as well. Then another field in which I think material religion could be interesting in the context of Indonesia is new animism. So within new animism, again, agency is awarded to agency is considered to be something that goes beyond human actors. So it's also taken as something that can be possessed by inanimate, so-called inanimate non-human nature. I think there's several examples of this, but maybe I should, first of all, maybe new animism is you could say a research school within religious studies anthropology that's mostly informed by studies to Native American communities. And so it does not have the negative connotation that animism previously had. New animism basically holds a rejection of dualisms, so of the dualism between nature and culture, between object and subject, and it tries to reconceptualize relationships between human and non-human nature. And I think one example would be of this particular tradition would be the study by Samsul Ma'arif, also known as Mas Ancu by many, of course, who studied Amatoan personhood. And of course, he himself does not necessarily link this immediately to new animism, but more to religious ecologies. But I think it does have a lot in common with new animism in the sense that personhood can be awarded to so-called inanimate, non-human nature as well. So that's one other potential of the material study of religion. Then lastly, indigenous religions and world religions. So the relationship between the two. I've noticed in several discussions with colleagues at UKDW, for example, that there's a lot of attention for reconceptualizations of the category of religion, and oftentimes, or definitions of religion, and oftentimes this relates to also to the distinction between indigenous religions, whether it's called aliran kepercayaan or kearifan lokal or agama suku, with the world religions. And I think a material understanding of religion can also contribute to a new, basically can contribute a new perspective to this this understanding of the relationship between what is indigenous religion and what is world religion. Let's see. Oh yeah, just to give an example, I have the book here. Webb Keen, I'm not sure if anyone knows this book. Webb Keen wrote a book on Christian moderns, basically on the relationship between the followers of Marapu, Mzumba, and the Calvinist missionaries, the Dutch Calvinist missionaries that arrived, to show this distinction or this dynamic between what we consider a world religion and an indigenous religion, and how this affects our conceptualization of religion as well. And materiality plays a very important role in his book as well. So I should move on because of time. I'll try to be a little bit faster, so I won't take too much time. Now, of course, I think material religion can also be interesting in relation to interreligious studies, and also in relation to the religious conflict, so to speak, so in conflict situations between religious communities. I think one example of a study that has already taken place is from Patricia Speyer. Some of you may know her. She wrote a study on, I think on Ambon, the violence and conflict between Christians and Muslims on Ambon, and how several religious objects or religious places, territories, how these functioned within this conflict as well. So this is also shifting the focus of the study of religion from beliefs about the other, so say interreligious attitudes or interreligious beliefs, or to the role of materiality in how we understand dynamics between religious communities. So she, for example, showed that a lot of the violence between Christians and Muslims in Ambon caused a certain degree of segregation between the two communities. So a spatial segregation, spaces, of course, or territories should also be considered part of materiality in religious context. Another example is I think there's been several moments where I talked with people about something that happened, I think it was in 2017 or 18, a while ago already, where the UKDW had a billboard in front of the campus of a lady who was wearing a jilbab. And this caused a big discussion, if I'm not mistaken. And in the end, they had to remove this billboard as well. So this image also became religious materiality in a way, in the sense that it caused certain sensibilities, it caused emotions, it caused a debate on religion and on basically on the identity of UKDW, and also to what extent that identity relates to other religious communities. So I think those are some other opportunities for the potential of material religion. And then, of course, religious and cultural material heritage. So obviously there's, from archaeology, from the perspective or approach of archaeology, the field of archaeology, a lot of the religious heritage or cultural heritage throughout Indonesia has already been analyzed, has been studied, but they can also be studied from a perspective of material religion. So in which these objects or buildings or whatever it may be are considered a part of material religion, in which, for example, chandis that are no longer in use to what extent are they religious materiality? That can be a question that can also contribute to our understanding of what material religion is in the context of Indonesia. Moving on. Yeah, I'll quickly mention some of these because I don't want to take up too much time. Yeah. So lastly, I think religion in relation to media and technology can also be part of the agenda of material religion, the study of material religion. And if you link material religion, the approach of material religion to media and technology, that means you go beyond technology as a means, basically, for religious life, but more as an integral part of, like an integral material part of religion. So it can be a different approach to technology and media in relation to religion. Then, yeah, economies of religion and piety. So the exchange of religious goods, the value of religious objects. For example, when something is considered halal or haram, that attributes a certain value to religious objects. Of course, the same is true for religious objects or religious symbols that can be purchased or that can be given as presents to people. And then there's the regulation of the sacrality of objects. So who decides whether an object can be considered sacred or not, can be part of religious materiality. And then lastly, I think material religion in the context of Indonesia can also be interesting in relation to religious bodies and religious dress. I found a paper by Carla Jones, for example, who studied Busana Muslim. So how do, in a paper she studied basically how women negotiate piety in relation to materiality, in relation to consumption and modernity. So these can all be linked to one another. Piety, ethics, identity can all be linked within materiality, within something like religious dress, Busana Muslim, in this particular instance. Yeah, I'll move on to the conclusions because of time. So first of all, I think one of the, let's say, preliminary conclusions that I've drawn thus far is that, yeah, so as opposed to linguistic and discursive approaches, a material framework for the study of religion enables us to treat objects, bodies, images, and other forms of religious materiality as an integral part of religion, not just as a symbol or not just as a representation of something else. Then secondly, the emphasis on critical engagement with subject-object, the human material, so the human non-human divide, the material-immaterial divide, just the divide between mind and matter. And all those distinctions, so subject-object, human material, material-immaterial, all those distinctions is what connects material religion with research on ecology and sustainability. So what research on ecology and sustainability and material religion have in common, that they provide a critical reassessment of those distinctions. And then lastly, I think the potential of material framework to reconceptualize religion offers a new lens for the discussions of the relations between what we consider indigenous and what we consider world religions in the context of Indonesia. And I think this can be an important potential of the material framework of religion, because it links questions of, it links basically this discussion on the relation between indigenous and world religions to questions of modernity, secularism, globalization, but also questions of the missionary, the history of the missionary movement in Indonesia. So yeah, these are some of the preliminary conclusions that I have, and I hope that there are many questions and a lot of feedback, so I can refine these findings further. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Cor, for your presentation. And now let's have discussion. For those of you who want to ask or comments, you may raise your virtual hand, or if you will, you could also write down your questions or comments in the chat box, or for those watching via YouTube, via our YouTube channel's comment section. So while waiting for all the participants to, ask or to comment, I personally still don't understand clearly about the difference between material religion or the material approach to religion and realism and constructionism. You mentioned, Cor, in your presentation that material religion is sort of a middle ground between realism and constructionism. But as far as I can see, it is similar to constructionism. So I think the best way is to take one example. Let's say you mentioned one example of new animism, and we can take a concrete case where local religion practitioners in Jogja, or perhaps some Muslims in Jogja, who give offerings to the sea, to the ocean. Local beliefs say that there is a what is it in English? A goddess of the sea, and they give offering to that. So how would the material approach to religion, result in the research of this phenomenon? Whether the idea about personhood, that there is the non-human nature, as opposed to that there is spirit in the old animism compared to the new animism, is that really something that is material, or in fact scholars construct, as so to speak? Yeah.
I think of course there are different. I think first of all, of course, there are different approaches within the study of materiality in relation to religion. So I think there are some approaches that focus more on symbolic representation. So in which, in that sense, you could say, I think what you're referring to is maybe Ratu Kidul, or no? Yeah. So then you could say, like, the sea is a symbol representing something else, right? Or this image of Ratu Kidul is a symbol of something, of another meaning, basically. So it has, so basically, then you take the material object to be a representation of a meaning, and I think the tendency maybe of constructionism is to an extent to maybe reduce religious materiality to their signification, so to the meaning that they carry. Whereas I think from the perspective of material religion, the object, or the religious object, whether it's human-made, so whether it's a cultural object or a natural object, is also taken to be an integral part of religion. So it's not simply a representation, or it's not simply a symbol of a certain meaning, but it's also considered as something that actually, how do you say that, has agency, so that actually causes something to happen, or that actually, it can be taken for example, I think I don't know exactly about Ratu Kidul, but say the traditions around the traditions around the offerings for Ratu Kidul have changed over time, right? Then you could say that is the construct, a construct of those communities that follow the traditions. But you could also approach them differently and look more at how the materiality of the tradition has caused the tradition to change, or has caused the practitioners to use different types of worship to relate in a different way to the material. Does that make sense or no?
Not yet.
Okay.
I still don't understand clearly. What I mean is that whether that symbolization of that the sea symbolize something, or whether that is what the practitioners themselves believe, or what scholars construct and project that symbolization to the practitioners.
Yeah.
Just
Sorry, I interrupted you.
no, that's good.
So yeah, I think both. I think what happens is both, right? So I think, yeah, of course, from the perspective of, yeah, of course, scholars, I think constructionism happens on both levels, I would say. So you could say the practitioners attribute meaning to a certain symbol. So that is, in a way, a social construction. But what also happens, of course, is that scholars approach it as such. Scholars approach it as something that is constructed by the people who follow those particular traditions. I think what material religion tries to do is not necessarily focus on the construction of meanings, but more on the role of material objects, religious materiality within the religious tradition, so to speak, or within the religious communities. And so I think in constructionism, we often tend to move towards meaning quite easily, towards the meanings that people attribute to symbols or objects. But I think within material religion, the material is taken as a central focus of the analysis. So materiality is given a more central place within religious studies as such, basically. Does that make sense? Or?
Yeah. There is one question here from Malang. Malang Himalayasan.
Thank you, Dr. Briggs. I have one question for you. Is if we know that material religion is it's a part of it's an inevitable. It's supposed
so
to be.
Sorry, it's really noisy right there. Halo, Mas Malang.
Okay.
I think he moves to another place.
To a quieter place. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Yeah, we still have around 25 minutes for discussion. For the people here who want to ask questions, perhaps, or from YouTube. No one yet. So just to follow up what you explained earlier, you mentioned that constructionism tends to just let me continue first. Yeah, turn easily into meaning, while I guess, but correct me if I'm wrong, the very concept of materiality itself is also a meaning. Just a quick question. So that also derive meaning from material objects, right?
Yeah. So as far as I understand it, the distinction, yeah, oftentimes the distinction is phrased in such a way within by scholars who basically focus on religion as a form of materiality. So scholars who try to follow this approach to religious studies, they kind of explain the distinction as follows. Within material religion, material is not how do you say that? Is not secondary to meaning. So basically, meaning and material are taken to be kind of on par or equal in a way. Whereas within constructionism, you could say meaning is often taken to be the essence of material. So a symbol, for example, to take a very simple example, a flag symbolizes something, the flag of a country or whatever, symbolizes something. And I think within the approach of material religion, this, the approach of material religion criticizes constructionism because it says that constructionism puts too much emphasis on the meaning of a symbol like a flag. Whereas the material approach to religion would say we should focus more on the material itself. And what does the material do? What does the material, how do you say that? What is the effect of the material on communities? Or, for example, with if I look at for example, this billboard that was outside UKDW, right? This billboard of this advertisement with a picture of a woman wearing a jilbab. Apparently, that very image caused certain sensibilities. Of course, I know, like I've talked about with colleagues, and a lot of them say, well, that's only a very small group, and it's not, like, people kind of try to maybe diminish the importance of that, what happened there. But I think it does tell us something about how an image can be understood by people as a religious image or a religious statement almost, and consequently causes certain religious sensibilities. So yeah, strong emotions with people. So the very material in that sense has an effect on people, on communities, even in this particular sense, on the relationship between the UKDW and certain other religious communities. So I think that is kind of the approach that material religion would take, whereas maybe constructionism would focus more on, oh, what is the meaning of this particular billboard? What are they trying to communicate with it? So maybe that's the difference. Yeah.
There is one question in the chat box from Gunardi Endro. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm wondering that you have never mentioned power in your presentation. I'm curious whether we can approach to see material religions from how we locate the source of power. If we believe that the power resides in material beings, we tend to ascribe material religions. Conversely, if we believe that any power comes from the transcendental immaterial being, the God, we tend to speak in terms of immaterial religions. Would you agree on such an understanding?
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, I think power, yeah, of course, I would say power is is definitely an interesting topic in relation to material religion. And I think most of all because so in material religion, as I try to explain, the distinction between subject and object is kind of reassessed or criticized. So you could say, where does power reside? Basically, I think more so than power, I think within material religion, the term agency is often used. And you could say, where does agency take place? Is agency with basically the subjects or the people who are part of a religious tradition, or does agency maybe take place in interaction between the material object and the subjects? Or is there another way to configure agency between the two? So I think, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question really. I think the question of power is interesting. I think within material religion, power is extended to material things. So basically, things that we often consider, how do you say that? Things that we often consider inanimate within material religion can be given a certain degree of power and agency. So in that sense, I think it's interesting. But let me quickly go back to the question because I feel like I'm. Yeah, I think. Yeah, maybe quickly on the question of if we believe that any power comes from the transcendental immaterial being. We tend to speak in terms of immaterial religions. So basically, an interesting discussion that's happening now within material religion is whether there is such a thing as immaterial religion. So I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned European Protestantism. I emphasize European Protestantism because I want to differentiate that from Protestantism in other locations. So I think Protestantism in Indonesia is different from European Protestantism, for example. European Protestantism has quite a transcendental image of God. And nowadays, there's actually a lot of discussion on whether that means that European Protestantism is an immaterial religion, or whether there are other basically shapes of materiality within European Protestantism. So there are some scholars now that are trying to conceptualize language as material to further complicate things. I'm not sure if that's a useful way to look at it, but they are trying to look at text and language as material objects. And as such, you could say, for example, that a creed, a religious creed, can become a religious object or can be a religious object. And as such, you could say that even religions that have a very transcendental understanding of the divine still somehow acquire a material form in the shape of a creed or text or language.
Gunadi Indra, if you still want to follow up that answer, you can write down your comments later. Now let's move to the question by Chris Hayanto Mbudita. This is a CRCS student. It is often found in indigenous religions in Indonesia that their religiosity is very connected to their environment, agriculture, etc. In this regard, land is both for ritual place and for agriculture, and it is interconnected. How do you see the opportunities to talk about sustainable development related to ecological degradation by using religious argumentation? because religion often seems to be neglected in this process.
Yeah.
I guess it's more about religion and ecology, and whether religious arguments really support ecological cause.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think, yeah, so in my presentation, I think I would say that research to religion and ecology and the research approach of material religion more or less find each other within new animism. And of course, that is not the only way ecology and material religion can be combined, but I think it is one way in which those two approaches to religion kind of link up with each other. And so within new animism, there is a lot of attention for basically how communities perceive the relationship between subject and object. So, for example, how communities perceive or how communities deal with is maybe a better way to phrase it, how communities deal with the relationship between human and non-human nature. And so I think that definitely links with certain questions around indigenous religions in Indonesia. I think it's also an interesting distinction between I often in discussions about ecology and religion, it is distinction between indigenous religions and world religions often emerges. And I think it's also an interesting distinction because oftentimes we equate world religions or the perspective of world religions with anthropocentrism, whereas indigenous religions are oftentimes taken to be more critical of anthropocentrism. But I do think, in fact, that there are within indigenous religions as well as within world religions, especially if we look at world religions as religious forms that are being contextualized, that take on different shapes in different contexts. I think there's a lot to say for the argument that world religions can also carry, how do you say that? A very critical attitude towards anthropocentrism. So they can also be, they can also be considered in a way sites of contestation of the relationship between humans and non-human nature. Yeah, I'm not sure if this answers the question.
I think so.
Okay.
It already. So there is still 10 minutes. No, yeah, around that. If there are still people who want to ask or comment. There is one from YouTube. What is the difference between material religion and materialism in general?
Materialism in general.
In philosophy, I guess that.
Okay, yeah. It's a good question. I think, so within philosophy, of course, there's also a renewed focus on materiality, or at least within some philosophical schools, there is. I gave the examples of, I think of Bruno Latour, for example. Actor network theory is often referred to in that sense. I think the difference is that within material religion, the focus is on religious materiality, and of course that is that could be, you could say that is a, how do you say that? A closed way of reasoning, because when is something religious materiality, right? Who makes it religious materiality? So I think that should be one of the questions that can be part of the material approach to religion. How do objects become religious? So how does an object ascertain a certain religious status, or how does an object become sacred, you know? So within, I think that those questions can be part of material religion. But I think the difference with like philosophical approaches to materiality is that material religion focuses on religion, so on materials in relation to religious communities, you could say. Yeah.
There is a critical comment from Gunardi Endro. Don't you think it would be moving backward if we approach ecological problems through material religion approach? What I mean is that if we believe that any material being object is believed to have power in itself, then we tend to disbelieve the power of sciences, positive sciences. That is moving backward. Yeah.
I think
you agree with that?
Yeah, well, positive, I think, yeah. Yeah, positive as in meaning positivistic, maybe. I think that could be right. Of course, I think yeah. So I think the material religion, maybe, I'm sure there are people within the material approach to religion who actually consider material or objects or inanimate objects to have power. But I think in general, it's more taken to be power as in agency, as in they can cause things. So they have an effect on people, on communities. So of course we can, like, it is difficult, especially as people within humanities or as students and scholars of religion, it is difficult to make claims about whether inanimate objects have actual power or have actual agency. But I think for someone from a perspective of material religion, they have agency in the sense that they cause certain effects, that they move people to do certain things, that they make people feel certain feelings, you know. Again, I give the example of the billboard. You know, this caused certain emotions, certain sensibilities with people. But I mean, there's many other examples, of course, as well. I mean, for example, the present, when someone is present in a, what is considered a sacred space, you know, in a mosque or a church building, that can have an effect on how they physically feel. And in that sense, you could say the actual material, the space, the building has power to cause something, to make someone feel something, either be it to feel a sense of calmness or a sense of joy, or, you know, all those things. So in that sense, I think people, scholars who focus on material religion would say materiality has power, has agency. Yeah.
All right. No one again want to ask. Any last comments, Cor, before we finish this forum?
In the beginning, so in the beginning, I gave my my email address. I would say if anyone has any questions or comments, please email me. I'll put it in the chat as well.
Well, I guess about the history of this study itself. Is it something recent, or the study of material religion? What is the prominent scholar today of this field?
That's a very good question. So of course I am coming from I just put my email in the chat, so when people have questions or comments still, please. So I think there's several. I would say there is Birgit Meyer, who wrote a lot on material religion in the context of Africa, so several African societies. Then there is Webb Keen. So he wrote on Sumba. I think this is a very interesting book when it comes to material religion. Then in addition, I would say there is someone like David Morgan. I'm not sure if anyone knows. Let me see. Let me see. I can. So David Morgan and another. Who would be another interesting? I mentioned someone in the presentation as well, called Braunlein. I think she's a German scholar of religion who wrote more on new animism. So if you really want to go further in that direction, but I would say for the context of Indonesia, I would say the main scholar would be Webb Keen. And then Webb Keen also again refers to all these other scholars who also are active within this approach to religion.
All right. Thank you so much, Concrete. I've never met you in person. Hope that we can meet within the near future. If you are still in Jogja, right?
I'm in
Jogja. I'm in Jogja as well. So thank you again, and as well for the participants who have been who have asked and comments. And as this is a weekly forum, then we will have yet another forum next week, and the speaker is Mike Quinlan, a Christian pastor and an alumnus of ICRS, is going to speak about Muslim migrants on Sumba and Timor Islands. Next Wednesday, April 14, at the same time, starting 1 p.m. Afternoon. So hope that we can see you again, and stay safe and